Jack had always prided himself on the tranquility of his life. His small farm on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood was where he found peace, surrounded by the hum of nature and the rumble of his antique tractors, each one a cherished relic from the past. The kind of place where people waved as they passed, and the biggest issue was a neighbor's dog getting loose in the yard. But everything changed the day the letter arrived. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Jack walked out to the mailbox. The sun was rising, the crisp air filled with the scent of fresh earth, and the familiar creak of his boots against the gravel path was soothing. But as his hand closed around the envelope, something gnawed at him. It was too crisp, too official. A thick letter, not one of the usual catalogs or bills. His fingers ran across the HOA's embossed logo, the same one that had caused so many problems for others in the neighborhood. He tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the letter quickly, but the words seemed to blur, then snap into focus. Violation notice. His heart skipped. The tractor. The letter went on to list the alleged infraction. Unapproved vehicle visible in the yard. His beloved 1947 International Harvester, a tractor he had lovingly restored and used as a symbol of his family's hard work, was apparently an eyesore. A sudden unease slithered down his spine. He had lived here for years, and no one had ever complained about the tractor before. Sure, it was old, but it was his pride, his heritage. What could possibly be the problem? The letter went on to say that if the tractor wasn't removed within 48 hours, he would face escalating fines. And worse, a formal hearing. The HOA was no stranger to wielding its power, but this felt personal. It was as though someone had singled him out for reasons he couldn't fathom. Jack stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the letter in his hand sinking in. He looked up at the house. His wife, Sarah, was inside, likely finishing her morning coffee. She had always been supportive of his hobbies, never once suggesting he sell the tractors for something more practical. They had built their life here, peaceful, uncomplicated. But now, with this letter, that peace seemed to be unraveling. He turned his gaze toward the street. The neighborhood was still asleep, the occasional car drifting down the road. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw her, Karen, the HOA's self-appointed neighborhood guardian. She was standing on the other side of the road, watching. The moment their eyes met, she gave him a tight-lipped smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. He could almost feel her satisfaction from across the street. He knew she was the one behind this. Karen had made it her mission to enforce every rule, no matter how trivial, in the HOA handbook. A single leaf out of place on a lawn could send her into a fit, and a well-maintained tractor in someone's yard was apparently too much for her to tolerate. Jack's blood boiled, but he forced himself to take a breath. He wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. But as he walked back toward the house, an unsettling thought lingered. Why now? Karen had always been a nuisance, but this was different. She was a bulldozer, and he was standing in her way. He couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning. As the door closed behind him, Jack made a promise to himself. He wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let one person, one neighbor, control his life. But little did he know, this small, seemingly insignificant dispute would spark a firestorm that would change everything. The battle for his tractor had just begun. The day after receiving the HOA's letter, Jack couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was subtle at first, just an odd glance from across the street, an unfamiliar car parked nearby. But soon, the feeling grew to an undeniable certainty. Karen was keeping an eye on him. Her presence had always been a lurking annoyance in the neighborhood, but now it felt like she was taking it to a whole new level. Jack had been working in his garage that afternoon, tuning up an old Ford tractor when he noticed her. She was standing at the edge of his yard, leaning slightly forward, as if trying to get a closer look at something. Her eyes were fixed on the tractor, and there was no mistaking the smug expression on her face. Her gaze flicked to Jack, then quickly darted away, as if she were trying to avoid detection. But it was too late. Jack's pulse quickened. What is she doing? He knew that look. That's the look someone gives when they think they have power over you. The kind of look that made you feel like an intruder in your own life. He dropped his wrench onto the workbench and wiped his hands on his shirt before stepping outside. Karen didn't acknowledge him right away. Instead, she pretended to admire the flowers in her yard, the same way she always did when she was trying to act casual. But Jack wasn't fooled. He knew this was no coincidence. "Good afternoon, Karen," Jack said, his voice calm but with an edge of suspicion. She turned toward him, her lips curling into that fake smile of hers. "Oh, Jack, I didn't see you there. Just making sure everything is in order." She paused, glancing toward the tractor. "You really should keep that thing inside. It's not very neighborly to have it out where everyone can see it. You know how these things can become an eyesore." Jack's hand clenched into a fist, but he forced a smile in return. "I don't think it's an eyesore. It's been here for years, and no one's complained until now." Karen's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Well, it's only a matter of time before more people notice. You'd be surprised how many people are bothered by it, Jack. You don't want to upset the wrong people." Her eyes flicked around suspiciously, as if there were a hidden audience watching their conversation. Jack stood tall. "She's trying to intimidate me." He could see it now. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was planting seeds of doubt, trying to manipulate the neighborhood into siding with her. "Is that a threat?" Jack's voice was steady, but there was a sharpness in it now. Karen quickly waved him off, her eyes darting nervously. "Of course not. Just a friendly reminder, Jack. You wouldn't want to cause trouble, would you?" She turned, making her way back to her house with an exaggerated sway in her step, leaving Jack standing there with a knot tightening in his stomach. As she disappeared behind her door, Jack's mind raced. What game is she playing? He had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about the tractor anymore. There was something more sinister going on, and Karen was at the center of it. Later that night, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his every move was being watched. He couldn't help but glance out of the window toward her house, half expecting to see her peering out from behind the curtains. He'd had enough of feeling like a pawn in her game. The next morning, he decided to do some digging. It was time to find out just who Karen really was and why she seemed so obsessed with him. He wasn't prepared for what he was about to uncover. As he searched online, a pattern began to emerge. Karen wasn't just the overbearing neighbor everyone tolerated. She had a history, and not a good one. Jack discovered reports of previous HOA members who had been targeted by her for petty violations, neighbors who had been bullied, and one particularly shocking claim: a lawsuit she had filed against a resident over something as trivial as a flower arrangement. The more he uncovered, the darker it seemed. Karen had a history of using the HOA as a weapon to control the lives of everyone around her. But what was her ultimate goal? What was she after? The answers weren't clear, but Jack knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. And now he was tangled in her web. But what had he gotten himself into? The more Jack dug into Karen's past, the more he realized that she wasn't just a petty, power-hungry neighbor. No, she was something far worse, a mastermind who had carefully woven herself into the fabric of the HOA, using it as a tool to manipulate, control, and punish. Each click of the mouse seemed to peel back another layer of her disturbing history, revealing a pattern of strange incidents, all leading back to her. Jack's pulse quickened as he read through a local news article from a few years ago. It was a story about a man named Richard Hughes, a retired military vet who had been forced to sell his home after Karen filed a series of complaints against him. The complaints were absurd. His truck was too loud, his garden wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough, and the fence he built around his backyard violated some obscure HOA rule. The article hinted at something deeper, something more sinister. There were rumors that Karen had been involved in pressuring Richard into selling. Jack clicked on another link, one that led to a community forum where former neighbors described Karen's tactics. She would find any and every excuse to target those she didn't like, pushing them out of the neighborhood one by one. Jack leaned back in his chair, the weight of what he'd just discovered sinking in. This wasn't just about a tractor anymore. Karen had been using the HOA to ruin lives, systematically tearing down anyone who dared to challenge her version of what was proper. But why? What did she want from all of this? Jack's mind raced. It was then that he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. A blog post from a former HOA board member who had mysteriously disappeared a few months after writing it. In the post, the board member detailed how Karen had manipulated the system for personal gain. According to the post, she had been blackmailing contractors and pocketing kickbacks for years, all while pretending to uphold the rules of the HOA. The post had been taken down quickly after it went up, but not before Jack had saved the evidence. He leaned forward, his hands shaking slightly as he absorbed the weight of what he was reading. This was bigger than he thought. The HOA wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a corrupt machine, and Karen was at the wheel. But Jack couldn't stop there. There had to be more, something that would expose her for good. His eyes darted to the screen as he searched for anything more about her. There had to be more people, more victims, someone else who had suffered at her hands. That's when he found it. An old news article buried deep in the archives, a story from a few years back about an investigation into a small-time contractor who had been accused of inflating invoices for HOA-approved projects. The contractor, who had worked on several homes in the neighborhood, had mysteriously disappeared before charges could be filed. A chill ran down Jack's spine. Had Karen been involved in that? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but they weren't enough. Jack needed to confront her, to expose her for what she really was. But as the night wore on, a gnawing sense of dread took over him. It was one thing to uncover the truth. It was another to fight someone as powerful as Karen. She had the HOA, the neighbors who feared her, and a web of deceit woven so tightly that no one could see it, let alone untangle it. Jack's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. Karen's here. She's in the front yard, watching the tractor again. Jack's stomach churned. He had to act fast, before Karen made her next move. But what if she was already 2 steps ahead? What if she knew he was onto her? He couldn't wait any longer. This was war. As he stepped toward the door, he couldn't help but wonder just how far Karen would go to keep her secrets buried. And what would he have to sacrifice to stop her? Jack's heart pounded as he stepped out the door, his breath heavy in the cool morning air. He could see Karen, standing across the yard, her arms crossed in front of her chest as she studied the tractor with unnerving intensity. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was waiting for him to make a move. He hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. What now? Karen's eyes flicked toward him, and their gazes locked. That tight-lipped smile of hers returned, almost as if she was daring him to do something. Anything. Jack, she called, her voice overly sweet, dripping with feigned innocence. I'm just out here, making sure everything's in order. You know, for the HOA's sake, we can't have any surprises. She looked pointedly at the tractor, as if it were some sort of ticking time bomb. Jack felt the weight of her gaze like a physical presence, suffocating him. He forced a smile, trying to mask the tension building in his chest. The tractor's fine, Karen. It's not going anywhere. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. We'll see about that, won't we? Her words sent a chill down his spine, and before he could respond, she turned on her heel and walked briskly back to her house. Jack stood there, still frozen, the echo of her words ringing in his ears. It wasn't just a complaint anymore. It was a warning. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. Jack tried to go about his daily routine, working on his tractors, tending to the farm. But every time he looked up, Karen was there, watching, lurking from behind her curtains, or strolling by with that unnerving predatory gait. It felt like she was everywhere. The quiet peace of his life was being replaced with a constant, gnawing anxiety. Then came the first blow. A formal letter from the HOA. It wasn't just a warning this time. It was a summons, a hearing. Jack was being accused of violating neighborhood rules and regulations, with the tractor as the primary offense. But there was something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The letter threatened legal action if he didn't remove the tractor immediately. He read it twice, disbelief creeping into his thoughts. How could this be happening? A wave of frustration hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about a tractor anymore. It was about control, about Karen's relentless need to tear him down. He had become her target, and she wasn't going to stop until she'd won. Jack clenched the letter in his fist, his mind racing. What the hell was she trying to pull? With the hearing looming, Jack felt a heavy sense of dread settle over him. He wasn't sure what to do next, how to fight back against someone who held so much power over the neighborhood. He couldn't afford to just sit back and hope this would blow over. His mind kept returning to that dark, haunting feeling he had every time he saw her watching from a distance. What was Karen really after? It wasn't just a tractor. He had to know, had to understand the depths of her manipulation. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Jack started to see the subtle signs that others in the neighborhood were feeling the weight of Karen's influence. Neighbors who had once waved and smiled now avoided eye contact, walking quickly past his driveway without a word. The fear was palpable, and Jack could feel it too. And then, the unexpected happened. Jack received a call from a local reporter who had been following the story of the HOA's iron-fisted reign. The reporter, a young woman named Lisa, had heard about Jack's ongoing feud with Karen and wanted to learn more. At first, Jack was hesitant. He didn't want to make things worse. But then the weight of everything, the constant surveillance, the threats, the isolation, finally broke him. "I'm ready to fight back," Jack told her, his voice thick with resolve. "But I can't do it alone." As he hung up the phone, Jack knew one thing for sure. Karen had no idea what was coming. The game had just changed. The hearing was days away, and Jack could feel the tension in the air like a storm about to break. The whole neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath, as if waiting for something, waiting for him to back down, waiting for the final confrontation. Jack wasn't about to let that happen. Not now. Not after everything that had transpired. But Karen wasn't going to make it easy for him. As he walked down the street, heading toward his barn, he saw her again, standing by her front door with a smug expression plastered on her face. Her arms were folded, and there was no mistaking the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. She knew the power she had over him, over all of them. "You know, Jack," Karen called out, her voice oozing with superiority. "The HOA doesn't take kindly to rule breakers. I'm just doing my duty." Her words were soft, but there was an edge to them, a threat disguised as concern. Jack forced himself to remain calm, despite the anger boiling inside him. He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "I'm not breaking any rules, Karen," he replied, his tone steady but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." Karen smirked, as if she knew something he didn't. "We'll see about that." She turned, slipping back into her house with a final glance at him, as if to say this isn't over. Jack stood frozen for a moment, his pulse racing. He wasn't just fighting her anymore. He was fighting a system, a corrupt machine that had been allowed to run unchecked for far too long. And Karen, she was the puppet master, pulling all the strings. He needed more than just his word. He needed proof. As he waited for Lisa, the reporter, to arrive later that day, Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had spent the better part of his life working the land, repairing old tractors, building a life that was simple and honest. But now, it seemed like everything was unraveling, piece by piece, and Karen was the one pulling the threads. When Lisa finally showed up, she wasted no time. She was a sharp, no-nonsense reporter, determined to get to the bottom of the HOA's dark secrets. Jack could see the determination in her eyes, and for the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope. "So tell me everything," she said, her voice low, her pen poised above her notebook. Jack explained everything. The letters, the threats, Karen's strange behavior. But what he didn't tell her was the most pressing question on his mind. Why now? Why had Karen chosen this moment to strike, after years of living quietly in the neighborhood? What was it about the tractor that had set her off? Lisa listened intently, taking notes, then glanced up. "Jack, I've been following this HOA for months, and there's something I haven't told you. Karen isn't just some overzealous neighbor. She's in deep with the HOA leadership, and that gives her more power than you can imagine." Jack's stomach tightened. What was she saying? "I'm talking about kickbacks, shady deals, and contractors who've been forced to do business with her," Lisa continued. "She's using her position to manipulate and control not just the neighborhood, but entire projects that bring in a lot of money. It's bigger than you think." Jack's mind spun. Kickbacks, shady deals. He had no idea it was this corrupt. He'd always assumed the HOA was just a bunch of people trying to enforce rules to keep the neighborhood looking nice. But this was something entirely different. Lisa's next words hit him like a freight train. "I think the tractor might just be a distraction. Karen's playing a much bigger game, and you're in the way." Jack felt a rush of adrenaline, his heart pounding. She's not after the tractor. She's after something more, something much worse. As Jack absorbed this new information, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. He wasn't just fighting for his tractor anymore. He was fighting against a criminal network operating under the guise of a neighborhood association, and he was about to expose it all. But Karen was no fool. She knew Jack was digging deeper, and she wouldn't let him get away with it. Not without a fight. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The sun dipped low behind the horizon as Jack sat in his barn, sorting through the files he'd gathered over the past few days. His mind kept circling back to Lisa's revelations. Karen wasn't just a petty HOA enforcer. She was part of something much darker, something that had deep roots in the local construction and real estate industries. If she was involved in a web of corruption, it wasn't just his tractor she was after. It was control. Control over the entire neighborhood, maybe even the town. But Jack wasn't naive. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. Exposing someone like Karen, someone with power, resources, and connections, could come with deadly consequences. He had already seen how far she was willing to go to maintain her grip on the neighborhood. He wasn't about to let her intimidate him into silence, but the fear crept in, gnawing at the back of his mind. A sudden noise broke his concentration, a rustle in the tall grass outside the barn. Jack froze, his breath caught in his throat. He stood, moving cautiously toward the window, his eyes scanning the yard. The darkness made it difficult to see, but there, by the fence line, was a shadow. He squinted, trying to make out the figure. Was it Karen? The shadow didn't move, just lingered, as if waiting for something. Jack's pulse quickened. Something about the figure felt wrong. It wasn't just a passerby or someone out for a late-night stroll. Whoever it was, they were watching. Jack's gut twisted. This wasn't the first time he felt watched. Karen had been lurking around too often recently, and now it seemed her surveillance was escalating. He backed away from the window, heart pounding. He needed to stay calm. Whatever game Karen was playing, it was one she was going to regret. But he had to be careful. If he made a wrong move now, it could cost him everything. Minutes passed in agonizing silence. He tried to ignore the feeling of eyes on him, but it was impossible. Then, as if on cue, the shadow moved, quickly darting across the yard toward the back of his house. Jack's instincts kicked in, and he grabbed the nearest tool, an old wrench, clutching it like a weapon as he made his way toward the door. He crept outside, his breath steady, his every step calculated. There was no sign of the figure now, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood at attention. The air felt thick with danger, as if something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, a voice cut through the stillness, low and menacing. "You're making a mistake, Jack." Jack whirled around, heart leaping into his throat. Karen was standing in the shadows, just beyond the glow of his porch light, her expression unreadable. "Karen," he said, his voice steady but laced with the tension building inside him. "What do you want?" Her lips curled into that familiar, unnerving smile. "I don't want anything, Jack, but you're starting to interfere with things that don't concern you. People like you don't understand how the world works." Jack's blood ran cold. Interfere with things that don't concern me. What was she talking about? She took a step closer, her gaze locking onto his. "You've been digging into things that should have stayed buried. That's dangerous, Jack. For you, for everyone. People like me, we don't get taken down. And if you keep pushing, you're going to regret it." Jack's heart hammered in his chest. This wasn't just a neighborly spat anymore. It wasn't about rules or the tractor. It was about survival. Karen wasn't just some HOA enforcer. She was part of something much bigger, something dangerous. And if he wanted to expose her, he had to be ready for whatever she threw at him. Without another word, Karen turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Jack standing in the yard, heart racing, mind spinning. He knew what he had to do. The stakes were higher than ever, and Karen was playing for keeps. Jack was no longer just fighting for his tractor. He was fighting for his life. The air felt suffocating. Each passing day, the pressure mounted, but Jack refused to back down. The shadows of Karen's threats hovered like a dark cloud, clouding his every thought. Yet for all her power, Jack knew he had one thing she didn't: the truth. And the truth, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of rising to the surface. The hearing was only 2 days away. His nerves were stretched thin, like a wire ready to snap. The neighbors, those who hadn't outright avoided him, had offered no support. It was as if they were all too terrified of Karen and the grip she had over the HOA. Jack had learned that fear, not loyalty, kept the community under her thumb. He couldn't let that fear dictate his next move. Not now. Not when everything was about to be exposed. That night, as the wind howled outside, Jack sat in his dimly lit living room, staring at the stack of documents he had accumulated. The evidence was there. Corruption, fraud, extortion. But it still didn't feel like enough. It wasn't just about proving that Karen was a criminal. It was about showing that she was a dangerous one. Someone who had manipulated an entire system to serve her own interests. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Lisa. "Jack, I've got something." Her voice crackled over the line, urgent and low. "I've been digging into the contractors Karen's been working with. There's a name I didn't expect to find. Adrian Pierce." Jack's stomach churned. The name was familiar, too familiar. Adrian Pierce had been a local construction mogul, and his name had popped up in the same breath as Karen's in the stories Lisa had uncovered. But there was something darker about Pierce, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. "Adrian Pierce," Jack repeated, leaning forward. "What does he have to do with this?" Lisa's voice dropped even lower. "He's a fixer, a dirty one. I've traced some of the funds back to his companies. They've been involved in several illegal schemes to inflate bids and funnel money through fake projects. And get this, he was one of the people who helped cover up the disappearance of that contractor I told you about. The one who went missing after being accused of overcharging the HOA." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Disappeared. That was no accident. It was no coincidence that Pierce had ties to the shady deals Karen had orchestrated. "We need to move fast," Lisa continued. "I've got the evidence, Jack, but we need to make sure it all comes out before the hearing. Once Karen sees what I found, she'll come after us with everything she's got. She's not going to let you walk away from this." Jack's blood ran cold. He'd been thinking the same thing. If he showed up at the hearing with this kind of evidence, Karen would never let him leave the room unscathed. She had too much at stake, She wouldn't let her empire of corruption crumble without a fight. But then, an unsettling thought crept into his mind. What if it was too late to stop her? What if she had already planned her next move, one step ahead of him? Jack's hand trembled as he set down the phone, his mind racing with the consequences of his next actions. The truth was close now, closer than it had ever been. But getting it out into the open would come with a price. He had to be prepared. As the clock ticked past midnight, Jack found himself alone in the dark, contemplating his next move. He could feel it. The tension in the air, the sense of impending conflict. The storm was coming, and Karen was the eye of it. But he wasn't afraid anymore. No, he was determined. Whatever happened next, he was ready. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and the final piece was in his grasp. All he had to do was show the world the monster that Karen truly was. But that meant walking straight into the lion's den. And as Jack closed his eyes, preparing for the storm that was about to hit, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a tractor anymore. It was about taking back control. It was about finally ending Karen's reign of terror. And he was willing to risk everything to do it. The morning of the hearing arrived, gray clouds hanging low in the sky, as if the very heavens were holding their breath. Jack stood in front of the courthouse, his hands gripping the file of evidence he had carefully prepared over the last few days. His heart was a drumbeat in his chest, but there was no turning back now. This was it, the moment that could change everything. He wasn't just fighting for his tractor anymore. He wasn't just fighting to clear his name. This was about exposing the rot at the heart of the HOA and bringing down Karen, the puppet master who had manipulated everyone around her for far too long. Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. Inside the courthouse, the air buzzed with tension. He could hear Karen's voice before he even entered the hearing room. That same smug, self-satisfied tone as she spoke with the HOA board members. "Jack," she called out as he stepped into the room, her smile as cold as ever. "I see you've brought your little army of accusations, but you're wasting everyone's time." Jack didn't flinch. He walked toward the table, setting the file in front of the judge, the sound of the papers hitting the wood louder than anything in the room. He met Karen's eyes, his gaze unflinching. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying fire. The room went silent as the judge, an elderly man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, cleared his throat. "Let's begin, then," he said, his voice commanding. Karen, ever the tactician, went first, presenting her case with calm precision. She painted Jack as a defiant rule breaker, someone who had no regard for the HOA's guidelines. She played her cards carefully, laying out supposed violations of neighborhood codes, her words smooth as honey, hiding the venom beneath. But Jack had been preparing for this moment. With every ounce of his focus, he watched her speak, mentally dissecting every lie, every misrepresentation. When it was his turn, he stood up slowly, the room's eyes turning to him. "I'm not here to talk about rules or tractors," Jack began, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'm here to talk about something far more dangerous." He opened the file, revealing the documents, photos, and names Lisa had helped him uncover. "I've been digging into the HOA's dealings, and what I found is not just a neighborhood squabble. It's a web of corruption, extortion, and fraud. Karen has used this HOA to manipulate contractors, inflate costs, and cover up illegal activities. And it's time you all knew the truth." Gasps echoed through the room as Jack began laying out the evidence. Contracts tied to Adrian Pierce, shady kickbacks, and the mysterious disappearance of the contractor Lisa had mentioned. He watched as Karen's face went from confident to pale, her lips pressing into a thin line. She tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced her with a sharp glance. "This is preposterous," Karen spat, her voice cracking under the weight of Jack's accusations. "You're lying." But the room was no longer on her side. The faces around the table, the neighbors who had once bowed to her power, were beginning to shift in their seats. Doubts were creeping in. Whispers spread, and Jack could feel the shift in the atmosphere. They were starting to see the truth. The judge turned to Karen, his face stern. "Is this true? Are these accusations valid?" Karen's eyes darted frantically, but she knew it was over. She had underestimated Jack, had underestimated how far he would go to bring the truth to light. The lies she had woven for years were unraveling right before her eyes. "Aye." Her voice faltered. She had no more cards to play. The room erupted into chaos, neighbors rising to their feet, murmuring among themselves, some in disbelief, others in anger. Jack's heart raced as the judge motioned for order. "We'll take a recess," he announced. "This matter is far from settled, but it's clear we need a deeper investigation." Karen stood frozen, her face pale and drawn. For the first time, she looked small, vulnerable. Jack stepped back, watching as the once mighty Karen was stripped of her power, her facade crumbling. As the crowd began to disperse, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, but there was no victory dance. Not yet. There were still battles to be fought, still legal hurdles to clear. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right side of history. He caught Lisa's eye across the room, her smile a mix of triumph and exhaustion. They had done it. They had exposed the truth. Karen's reign was over. But Jack knew it wasn't just about taking her down. It was about sending a message. No one was above the law. No one was too powerful to be held accountable. And as he walked out of the courthouse, the weight of the past few weeks finally starting to lift, Jack realized one thing. He wasn't just fighting for his land anymore. He was fighting for a future where people like Karen would never get to control the lives of others again. And that, he thought, was a fight worth winning.